Hello everyone and greetings from Fiji. My name is Josefa Lalabalavu. I am the Pacific DRM Manager for Plan International based here in Suva. I have been working on humanitarian and disaster risk reduction for over 7 years and across climate change mitigation and adaptation interventions for over 5 years. Today, I want to talk about some of the successes and learnings we have had in the Australian Humanitarian Partnership's Disaster Ready program. The program that focuses on community-led disaster risk reduction and preparedness has now been operating for 5 years. We will soon be embarking on the next 5-year phase, so I felt now was an ideal time to reflect on everything that we have achieved and look at the lessons we can take forward. As I'm sure you're all aware, this region faces some of the most significant impacts of climate change in the world. The increase in major weather events in the Pacific, combined with the challenge of the pandemic and its economic impacts, have devastated communities. But throughout the Disaster Ready program, we are seeing proof that supporting disaster preparedness and coordination through a localized, responsive and inclusive program can help mitigate these impacts. We hope that Disaster Ready can inspire other DRR practitioners and donors to look at supporting localized coordination mechanisms that recognize the power of partnership between NGOs, civil society, and government. While competition can drive value for money, accountability, and effectiveness, it can sometimes cause fractures when we most need unity. Moving away from competitive funding mechanisms that pit potential partners against each other has been key to the success of Disaster Ready, as well as the broader AHP mechanism. In addition, activating our commitments to localization into action, creating space for Pacific leadership, and flexibility for the program to meet and adapt to local priorities has also been crucial. But first, let's start with some background on the Australian Humanitarian Partnership, or AHP. The AHP is a partnership between the Australian Government and 6 trusted Australian NGOs: Care Australia, Caritas Australia, which leads the church agency's disaster network operations, or Can Do Cooperative, comprised of smaller faith-based NGOs, Save the Children Australia, Oxfam Australia, Plan International Australia, and World Vision Australia. These agencies are all strongly experienced in humanitarian action, with extensive networks of national offices, partner NGOs, and churches on the ground in the Indo-Pacific region and globally. The AHP has the goal to save lives, alleviate suffering, and enhance human dignity in the face of conflict, disasters, and other humanitarian crises. And of course, preparedness plays a crucial role in meeting these objectives. In addition to the AHP's rapid onset and protracted crisis responses, which occur globally, the Disaster Ready program supports preparedness work in 4 Pacific countries: Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea, as well as in Timor-Leste. These countries are some of Australia's nearest neighbours. They are also facing disasters such as cyclones and floods with increasing frequency and intensity, impacting on broader efforts towards sustainable development, stability, and economic growth. In this context, investing in disaster risk reduction and local response mechanisms makes sense, and the spirit of partnership provided by the broader AHP mechanism promotes collaboration rather than competition, an important precondition for a coordinated response. Disaster Ready has supported more than 100 communities across 5 countries to be better prepared for disasters. Each country involved in the Disaster Ready program now has a country coordination committee led by one of the Australian-based NGOs. The committees are then comprised of other participating NGO members and their partners, civil society representatives, inclusion partners such as local women's organizations, organizations of people with disability, and LGBTQI+ associations, and representatives of government agencies such as national disaster management offices. These existing relationships have both strengthened community-based DRR and supported improved responses to the kinds of disasters we have come to expect in the Pacific, like Tropical Cyclone Harold and Yasa, for example. When COVID-19 turned our worlds upside down, the relationship building that had already taken place through Disaster Ready proved invaluable in mounting coordinated national responses. Country committees took the lead on designing health, livelihoods, and recovery programming for vulnerable communities by mobilizing additional COVID-19 funding received from the Australian government through the AHP. For example, across 7 PNG provinces, disaster-ready partners capitalized on existing government relationships to forge new partnership with provincial health authorities to support COVID-19 risk communication and community engagement, as well as the national vaccine rollout. In several Fijian communities, screening centers were set up by local disaster committees under the lead of community health workers. And disaster response tools like reflector vests and loudspeakers provided under Disaster Ready were used to coordinate COVID-19 testing and to keep the community informed. Communities continued to respond to other disasters as well. When an earthquake struck Anatayam Island in Vanuatu in early 2021, the recently trained Community Disaster and Climate Change Committee swung into action. The committee had already run a tsunami awareness session with community members, supported by Disaster Ready. After the earthquake, the committee evacuated community members to higher ground. Their quick initiative meant that the school was evacuated before a small tsunami swept up close to the classrooms. All these efforts demonstrated that the disaster-ready country committees were working and providing a strong basis for response. But we also learned that the committees were becoming stretched, particularly in managing monitoring and evaluation requirements from additional funding, while also working collaboratively to build partner capacity, at the same time as balancing both preparedness and response work. For the next phase of Disaster Ready, country committees will have more resourcing and flexible funding to respond. The design process for Disaster Ready 2.0, as we are calling it, is country-led, with national committees playing a key role in deciding their priorities. These will then feed into the overarching program goals. This work provides an important template for localization, something many donors are working towards, but a concept that can struggle for traction in agencies used to working in more top-down ways. The positive feedback from national governments in our region and other key stakeholders on disaster-ready support for their priorities and processes gives us a compelling argument for those in our own agencies who may see the risk rather than the rewards of shifting power. Inclusion is front and center in Disaster Ready's mission. We know women, children, and people with disabilities face the highest risk of harm from disasters. We have seen that including them at all stages of preparedness and response has invariably improved outcomes for all. Ensuring women's participation in community-based DRR right from the village level has been an important focus, and we are seeing change. In Vanuatu, the number of women participating in community disaster and climate change committees has grown. Last year, Oxfam and Save the Children reported 10 committees with women in leadership roles and 9 other committees with women in either the secretary or treasurer roles. Women now comprise between 40 and 50% of the committees, a significant shift that will support better and more inclusive response and resilience work. We have also made significant gains in ensuring people with disability are included in preparedness and response, from the national level all the way down to local communities, creating their own hazard maps and response plans. But we still have a long way to go. An independent evaluation released last year showed that the program had pushed participating NGOs and their partners to think and work in a more disability-inclusive way. But we still need more data and evidence on how this work is translating to positive outcomes for people with disabilities. Each country is at a different stage on disability inclusion, and there is more we can do in the next phase to build on our partnerships with disabled people's organization and streamline our inclusion work. This doesn't mean we haven't seen results. In PNG, people with disability are now more involved in disaster planning at the provincial level after strong advocacy efforts. In Solomon Islands, a disability-inclusive disaster messaging program worked with AHP partners, media, disaster management agencies, and DPOs to ensure everyone understood the communication needs of people with disabilities. In Fiji, when COVID-19 hit, disability organization representatives visited communities to collect information about how their members were affected. They later returned with the AHP partners to provide supplies and seeds needed to support food security and livelihoods for people with disability, which proved crucial for these community members as the economic impacts of the pandemic and lockdowns began to hit. Furthermore, in the wake of Tropical Cyclone Yasa in December 2020 and then Tropical Cyclone Anna in January 2021, the disability organization representatives in Fiji set up their own Disability Emergency Operations Center that collected information from and disseminated information to persons with disabilities across the country and provided updates to the Fiji National Disaster Management Office that fed into the National Disaster Situational Reports that were released in every 24 to 48-hour window. National Disabled People's Organizations are key members of disaster-ready country committees, supported by regional umbrella organization Pacific Disability Forum. And the next phase of Disaster Ready will build upon this inclusion focus. As we look toward the second phase of Disaster Ready, an increased focus on resilience will be at the program's core. Already, community-based disaster committees in disaster-ready countries have identified hazards through participatory processes. Organically, we have seen a particular focus on water access emerge, especially in Timor-Leste, with its prolonged dry seasons and heavy monsoons. In Papua New Guinea, communities north of Mandang have been planting mangroves to protect land from coastal erosion and storm surges. In Fiji, partners are supporting communities that have voluntarily relocated as climate change threatens livelihoods and security. The integration of climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and resilience programming is inescapable in the countries where disaster ready works. At the community level, it is already part of life. Communities see these hazards and risks combined. There is a strong appetite from communities to receive community-based disaster risk management trainings to further enhance their preparedness. At the national and international level, we can do more to integrate our approaches, and it will be an area of focus for Disaster Ready over the next 5 years. Fiji and our neighbors have been warned repeatedly to brace for more extreme weather events. The Australian government and AHP partners have proven their commitment to listening to local voices across the Pacific and in Timor-Leste in order to strengthen resilience against such disasters. When Disaster Ready was first designed, the grand bargain was still fresh, with work just beginning on localization commitments, and a global pandemic was a hypothetical planning activity, not our lived reality. Yet now, through strong partnerships and an openness to listen and learn, the Disaster Ready program has proven time and time again to be agile and flexible. Our network of partners in Australia and in implementing countries remain our biggest asset. Through mutual planning for localized response, our partners continuously demonstrate the importance of adaptability and trust. The ability of the Disaster Ready program to evolve in response to the changing context, both in terms of humanitarian and DRR practice, as well as emergent challenges, will continue to be one of its greatest strengths. And now, as we prepare for the second phase of this groundbreaking program, local voices will continue to take the lead on building a more resilient and prepared region. Vinaka Vakalevu.